everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. You know, last week, it was supposed to be Alien Week. I was going to do a whole week of aliens. The problem is I spent all day Monday talking about fat witches. And I do have to I don't often make corrections on this show, but there was a joke I told in that episode, which I didn't think was fair. I was thinking about it as I was walking home from work today. It's the equivalent of a shoddily produced, poorly lit Lifetime movie of the week. And this is not a joke. That is actually unfair to Lifetime movies, because a lot of Lifetime movies actually are fairly intriguing. I've seen a lot of them throughout my life. And as I was walking home, I was thinking, that's really not fair, because Lifetime movies, people put a lot of work into that stuff, as opposed to a completely made-up magical system. So I apologize to anyone I offended who makes Lifetime movies for that joke. And I spent the whole time talking about, like, overweight, whether or not being overweight makes you more magical and all sorts of stuff. I wasn't able to do my themed week, so this week we're doing it. So we have even more alien-themed stories for you this week. I'm gonna let you know, if you find aliens particularly creepy, see you next week, because I found some of the creepiest alien stories, and definitely the most intriguing alien stories. But not every segment's going to be about aliens. Like today is actually a fairly lighthearted one, and then we're going to do another story about the multiverse. But each episode this week will contain one alien story that will send chills up your spine. But let's go ahead and get it started with our first story here. Now, our first story is the story of President Trump and the aliens. Now, that story sounds awesome, but it's a little more nuanced than that. And I'm going to read you the full quote of the interview going on here. George Stephanopoulos, reporter, was interviewing President Trump, and it was a segment from an interview for, like, Good Morning America, or the Today Show, or something like that. And so you can tell I've done my research on this, but I did have to watch this video multiple times because I wanted to get exactly what Trump said. Because a lot of times it's the when it comes to President Trump and he's saying stuff, a lot of times you need the context, because otherwise you just pull out a particular sentence and you're like, what in the world? And then sometimes even with the context, you're like, what in the world? But you want to have the context for this. A lot of the articles are just picking particular sentences. George Stephanopoulos asks, it's at the end of an interview, and George Stephanopoulos is ending this interview by saying, well, we don't agree on that, but I do have one more question to ask you. This is a paraphrase, because one more question to ask you. You have access to all this information, and you know all of these mysteries. Have you been briefed on the recent sightings of UFOs? And Trump says, this is his exact quote, I have. I think it's probably, I want them to think whatever they think. They do say, I've seen and I've read and I've heard, and I did have one very brief meeting on it, but people are saying they're seeing UFOs. Do I believe it? Not particularly. Then George Stephanopoulos asks, do you think you'd know if there was evidence of extraterrestrials? Isn't it really cool to see this type of interview happening? It's really kind of cool. And Trump's response was, well, I think our great pilots would know, and some of them really see things that are a little bit different than in the past. So we're going to see, but we'll watch it and you'll be the first to know. Interview ends, shake hands, so on and so forth. I can't recall, I know that, there's been that tape where Reagan was like, I think sometimes the only thing that would unite humanity is a threat from beyond the stars. People always saw that as a veiled reference to aliens. I think it was just part of that thing during the Cold War, like the only thing that's going to get anyone to come together is an external threat. I don't think he was actually saying there were aliens out there. I can't recall another time a president has been so blunt, which shouldn't surprise me that it's Trump, but I don't think I can recall a time that a president's ever been so blunt when it comes to something. Because here's the thing, either they don't exist at all, and these highly trained pilots and their billions of dollars worth of equipment are wrong, which is troubling, or they exist and the President of the United States doesn't know that they exist, which is troubling, or that they exist and the President of the United States is lying to the American public and have been lying to the American public for 50 years through omission. They're not saying, Reagan and Bush and Eisenhower didn't come out and say, yes, there's aliens floating around and we have to fight them. I know Eisenhower made some questionable comments about him as well, but it's all fairly troubling. Either it's all made up and people have wasted their entire lives looking for these things, or so on and so forth. So to have a president to be so blunt, and someone goes, you believe in UFOs? And he kind of looks at him and goes, not particularly. I mean, that's just kind of it. And, There's been some. I'm doing a big story on the Navy sighting. There's been a lot of stuff that's come out, and I know we all know about that. The Navy sighting, maybe don't know about it. There was, back a couple years ago, there was a sighting of this little Tic Tac that popped up on radar, and it was flying around, and the fighter jet was chasing it, and the fighter jet's like, what is this thing? And it's really been brought to the it's been leaked, and it's really been brought to the forefront. And I talked about it briefly a couple episodes back, but it's been brought to the forefront. I finally want to finish that sentence. Recently, and the Navy is now investigating UFOs. There is a whole backstory to that I discovered through a series of articles. There's a whole backstory to that we'll be doing in a later episode. It's not fitting on this week because it's taken a ton of research, but you'll be surprised by the information. I was surprised by the information. There's a little teaser for an upcoming episode, probably next week. But don't take that story on face value because I've discovered some interesting stuff about that. So, we have this president, and you guys are like, do that story. Don't keep doing the Trump story. We'll get to it. What I think is interesting about this is you have the president of the United States saying that he doesn't believe in UFOs. And normally, they just kind of do like a wink and a nod type of thing, like you never know. I know John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign advisor, was really into UFOs. He really wanted to get in there and start digging through the UFOs. And Hillary Clinton made some references about wanting to get to the bottom of UFOs. But there's a lot of interesting things going on here, because one, you have the president saying, I don't think they're real. You have people who supported the president who are really deep into conspiracy lore, really troubled by this. Because he was supposed to be the guy who was going to bring out all this information and expose all of these secrets. And here's this guy saying, I don't believe in him. And on the flip side, you have the media going, we're supposed to disagree with Trump on everything. How do we disagree with this? And all of the articles where they talk about this, they go, but also Trump may be wrong because the Navy just opened this UFO thing, so maybe Trump doesn't know. And it's basically was making my head spin. But there's the UFO thing. It's funny and it's interesting, and it's the fallout of it on both sides of the political aisle are kind of weird. And really, it's almost a non-story other than the fact that it's funny and goofy. But there's an interesting component that is not being discussed in this video. And maybe body language. Now, I'm not a body language expert by any means, but body language. You have George, the interview that hasn't been aired yet, and it's just about politics and stuff like that, so I wouldn't discuss it anyways. But you have George Stephanopoulos ending this interview with President Trump. And it starts off with him saying, well, we won't agree on that, but let me ask you another question. And Donald Trump's body language is fairly combative. I don't know what they were talking about before, probably something he didn't like. And as George Stephanopoulos is starting the question, and again, you're being interviewed, you're being interviewed by somebody who you feel is combative towards you. You have no idea what... I used to be a journalist. I guess I kind of still am with the show, but I used to sit down and interview people all the time. And you do try to come up with sidewinders, with gotcha questions. So you never know what a reporter's going to ask you. Reporters and lawyers are not your friends if they want something from you. So, George Stephanopoulos is starting this question, and he's going, you know the mysteries, you have access to this information, and Trump does not know where this question is going. And as George Stephanopoulos continues to kind of weave his way to what he wants to get to, which is UFOs, and he's like, the mysteries of things, Donald Trump's body language gets very, very rigid. Like, you can tell he does not want to answer whatever question is going to be asked. And once Stephanopoulos mentions UFOs, he gets a big smile on his face, his body language relaxes, and his hands are animated, and he is answering very freely and off the cuff as he does. What question was he worried about Stephanopoulos asking? The fact that Donald Trump doesn't believe in UFOs, it doesn't surprise me at all. Donald Trump doesn't seem like the type of guy who goes off on flights of fancy of speculative stuff. My bigger question is, what question was he worried about being asked about mysteries that he would have the answer to? That's what I want to hear. UFO story was funny, and it was cute, and it threw everyone into a tizzy. But what made Donald Trump, what made the President of the United States so nervous that involved the mysteries of the world? But let's go ahead and move on to our next story. Now, our next story is really interesting. Our next story is something that I'd been wanting to cover since I heard about it, but I had to get all my ducks in a row to do it. Near-death experiences are one of those things that can never really be verified until they happen to you. It's a couple levels above hearing about somebody's dream, because it's related to something, hearing people talk about their dreams is like probably the most torturous thing possible. When someone's like, hey, I had this crazy dream last night, unless it really is absolutely shocking and crazy, it's usually, and I don't know why, I think there's some sort of intrinsic thing where people don't like hearing about other people's dreams, because nobody likes it, it's not just me. But near-death experiences are kind of like that, although they are intriguing because there's something where somebody had a tragic event and then they said they saw this thing and then they're alive, and you're like, well, that's an interesting thing, but it's still something that you can never really verify yourself. So I guess it's way above that. I would much rather hear near-death experiences, but I'm not saying I want a bunch of people to die, almost die, and then come to me and tell me stories. But generally, there's a lot of similarities between them leaving your body and the tunnel of light, and seeing loved ones come and either say, like, it's not your time, you need to stay here, and so on and so forth. So it's not something that I've read a lot about in my youth, but at a certain point I'm like, this is all kind of the same. And then I've heard near-death experiences where people go to hell and stuff like that, but even those kind of lost their luster after a while. I'm like, you went to hell? So lame. But, these people went through horrific events. But when I found this one, I thought, not only, this is going to be a weird one, guys, not only is this an intriguing near-death experience, it seems oddly familiar. Oddly familiar. Let's see if you think the same thing. This is a story from a man who posted this to a website about near-death experiences. So right there you have to think maybe he's just making it up because he wants to be on this website. And he goes through the rigmarole saying, I didn't want to write this, but a friend knew about this website and he encouraged me to write this, and I'm writing it. So just a disclaimer, this could all be made up. It could all be near-death experience fan fiction. Just a disclaimer. With that being said, let's go into this. It was July 15th. You know what, actually, I think the easiest way to do this story is I'm going to say like it is my experience. But it wasn't. So I don't want anyone to think that I experienced this in any way, shape, or form. I'm reading this basically as if I experienced it. But this dude did. This unnamed guy did. So again, this isn't a personal story. I never experienced this. Don't think that I did, but... And it's not going to be like a super dramatic reading where I was like, I sobbed so... It's not going to be like that. So anyways, July 15th, 2003. I was going to work. Now, by my house, on the way to work, there's an intersection that actually is quite dangerous. There's been a lot of accidents there over the years. And I knew it was dangerous. And I always was very careful when I was making a turn, when I was making a right-hand turn, because I knew the left lane was fairly hard to see, and a lot of cars got plowed into while they were making a right-hand turn. And it's just a normal four-way intersection. There's a large field to one side, neighborhoods off to the other sides, and so on and so forth. But this day, I was particularly harried because I had a very, very important business meeting I was late to, and stuff was falling through, and the whole deal was in jeopardy. So as I was approaching that intersection, the last thing I was thinking about was how dangerous it had been in the past for other people. And I go, and I make that right-hand turn, and I look, and there was a car coming right at me. It had to be going at least 90 miles an hour, at least. And it flashed in my head, I'm dead. And I saw the look on his face. I saw the look on the driver's face of the other car. That's how close he was to hitting me. I've never forgotten what that man's expression was. Terrifying. And then time lost. It slowed down or stopped. It just didn't matter. And that's when I noticed off in the field, that large empty field, I saw what appeared to be a water wheel. So like, those big water wheels that go, like they use for mills. It's a big circle with the paddles on it, like they're on a paddle boat, but this one, like water hits it each time. And I'm not doing a bit here. I'm trying the best way to explain it. It's a water wheel. So basically the water hits the bottom of it and it turns it so it hits another spoke, and it turns it and hits another spoke, and it's constantly churning the water. It's what appears to be that. Now, I'm not saying specifically that's exactly what it was, but that's how my mind interpreted this thing. It was a water wheel, and it was off in the field, and just by looking at it, I could tell